What's happening, guys? This is Winter and I am back with another video. So as you may have noticed, I have simplified my artist name, and don't worry, it's not really a change in direction, it's more of a focusing of what's really important for me and in my music. But if you want to keep up with the music side of things, I have a new channel that you can subscribe to. I'll put a link in the description below, because YouTube for some reason isn't letting me change the actual URL to my channel, which is kind of annoying. But if you want to stay up to date with the music side of things, make sure to also check out that other channel as well. All the tutorials and everything will still be posted on this channel, so don't worry if that's what you're sticking around for. Okay, so the sound that I'm going to be showing you guys today is the bass sound in my song Return, which sounds like this in context of the song. And whenever the sound is soloed, it sounds like this. Okay, so there's quite a bit going on here, but I will try to simplify it down as much as I can. So just to show you a general overview of the sound before we jump in, first we got this sub layer, which is basically just a simple sine wave layered with a triangle wave. Then I have a little bit of automation with a filter. And we'll be covering that today because it's basically just that. It's just a sine and triangle wave together. And then I have this noise base layer, which is kind of being panned a little bit whenever it has these hits. And then we've got some creative envelope modulation going on here, which I'll show you later. Then we have this bass top sound, and then we have this sort of audio lead sound that I resampled. All right, so let's go ahead and show you guys how I made the individual patches. So first, we'll go ahead and look at this noise bass layer, which soloed sounds like this. And the first thing we got going on is a line mixer 6:2, nothing crazy there. And then we have the antidote, which is the main synth patch. Okay, so the patch starts off with a noise wave just on voice count of 1 with a spread all the way up, so it's nice and wide sounding. And then we take the modifier, which acts like a high pass filter, and I put that at 55, so it just kind of filters out the low end from the noise, but still gives you that nice crisp top end. That's then fed into the mixer at a volume of 22%. Next going on here, we have a digital saw waveform. Voice count is just at 1, so don't worry about that spread because it won't do anything until you start having multiple voices. And then we have the semitone at -12. So it's basically just providing a bass tone to the white noise. I just went ahead and left that at the volume of 50%. And then I brought the sub 2 oscillator, which is just a really fat sounding saw waveform, up to 56%. And I put the analog drift, which kind of acts as this weird pitch shift, to 34%, just to kind of make the sound a little bit more interesting. And now the interesting thing that I did with this synth was I took the sub oscillator 1, which again is just similar to this, so it's basically just a low saw wave. And then I automated the sub oscillator to move up as the sound progressed, which whenever I do it, it causes this really weird phasing thing with the white noise to kind of make this super distorted bass sound, which sounds like this. Okay, so the next thing that we got going on here is just our Amplitube Decay and Sustainer all the way up, so it just provides a sustained note. We have the EQ effect, which goes to the mid gain, takes it down by about 3 decibels with a Q at 0.7. And the mid frequency is at 3.1 kilohertz. So it just kind of removes some of that fizzy top end that sounds a little bit harsh. Next, as you can probably hear by now, we have this really massive sounding reverb. The time is at about 3 seconds, high frequency damp all the way up, so we have all the high frequencies, low cut at 20% because we don't want any of the sub bass coming out of the sound to be fed into the reverb. Then we put the high cut at 84 because if you just unleash it all the way, it just sounds really harsh, and you don't want those high frequencies to build up too much. And then I put the dry wet at just 14%. Next, to make that reverb sound really fat, I have some compression, which happens after the reverb. The ratio is at about 4:1, threshold at -21 decibels, attack all the way down, so it's as fast as it can possibly go, release at about 20 milliseconds, so it's medium release, and then the dry wet's just all the way up, so we compress the sound all the way. So the main texture of this synth sound comes from these 2 distortion units, which I stack one after the other. So without these distortion units, it would sound like this, which is a nice tone, but it's very like white noisy. But then whenever I add the first warp distortion, it sounds like this, which gives it a really nice and distorted tone. Okay, so the first thing that's going on here is the damage control is at 22. It's on warp distortion mode. The sharpness is all the way up, and then the bias is at 70. Next from there, I moved on to this EQ section, cut the mids to -9 and the highs to -7. And then I put the master output just to 84, which I think is its default setting. The next distortion unit has a damage control of about 38. It's on tape mode, and the tape speed is all the way up to 127, and the compression is just its default amount, which is 30. And basically all this does is provide a little bit of distortion as well as some compression for the sound after this distortion unit. And then I've got a little bit of equalization just to kind of roll off the mids and highs, just to keep them from building up too much. And then again, this master level's at 89, which is its default setting. Okay, so the next thing that we have going on with this sound is the stereo splitter from Quad Electra. So I'd like to use this on certain bass sounds to provide really wide and lush sounds, but then also to keep them from building up too much in kind of the mid channels as well. And I also did another video on this, so if you want more information about mid-side processing, feel free to check out that video as well. Okay, so what we've got going on here is out of the back, you have the mid channel routed into this first EQ, and then it's routed here, and then back in, and then the sides routed into the second EQ. Okay, so on the mid channel, which soloed sounds just like this, I've just got this equalization, which is happening at 600 Hertz, gain of -12, and a Q of 2.1. All this does is remove these mids, which I didn't really like the sound of because they sound kind of boxy. The next channel is a side channel, and all I did here was I put all these at 0, so just kind of low shelved everything to keep bass from building up in the side channel, which could cause weird phasing issues, especially since I've got this really massive reverb on the whole bass sound. And then I went ahead and at about 2.6 Hertz, 2.6K, excuse me, -6 decibels, and 2.4 is the Q. I kind of removed all these harsh high frequencies that were happening in the sides, which without it would sound like this. Okay, so that's all I got going on for the mid-side processing. And then next I have this gated reverb, which really isn't doing that much, but it kind of provides this really weird delay effect, kind of, which if I was to show you, sounds like this. So it's kind of a strange pumping sound. So what you can do is go to the RV7, go to the gated reverb mode, which is algorithm 6, take the size down to -4, decay all the way down, and put the dampening at 40% because it's going to get very harsh if you don't kind of dampen the high frequencies. And then put the dry wet at 14 because we just want a tiny bit of this sound. The next thing that I have is an equalizer that is at 600 Hertz, cutting by 12, and the Q is at 3. And again, this just keeps those mids from building up quite a bit. I didn't want a very mid-heavy sound on this top layer. And then I've got some simple compression. You can really use any compression for this. I just like the decam on this specific sound. It's kind of like an SSL style compression, so I went with that one. So the attack is at 3 milliseconds. Release is at 0.6 seconds, so it's kind of a medium attack that's sort of slow, and then just a medium release. Ratio is at 4:1, -10 as the threshold, and a makeup gain of 8, just to kind of level things out. Okay, so that's a noise base layer sorted. Now let's move on to this bass top layer, which when soloed sounds like this. So by itself, it's kind of a strange sound, but whenever it's layered with the bass, it actually sounds really nice and kind of fills out the mid frequencies that are not present in the noise bass layer. So without it, it would sound like this. And then with it, it would sound like this. So all it really does is kind of fatten up that sound. Okay, so what we've got going on here is, again, our line mixer 6-2, a Thor unit with a mixed waves 1 wavetable selected. The octave is at -2 because we want the bass sound, and the position is at 96 just to get this really distorted sort of saw waveform. Route that through the filter, which I turned off, and I have the shaper on warp mode, which is a pretty intense, weird distortion, and the drive is at 97. And then I ran it into the chorus unit with the delay at 12 milliseconds, feedback at 0, rate at 48 Hertz, 0.48 Hertz, the amount at 16, and the dry wet at 76, which just kind of provides a wide, lush sound. So without it would sound like this, and with it, it sounds like this. Okay, so then I have a state variable filter. All these are turned all the way down so it doesn't do anything whenever this envelope triggers. It's on high pass mode, so everything below a frequency of 317 is cut out, so it just has that nice top end sound. And then the amp envelope, decay and sustainer all the way up, release is basically all the way down, and then the attack is at 1.30 seconds, just because I kind of want this fade in sound to evolve as the synth progresses. Okay, so the next two things we got going on is a saturation knob from Softtube. The saturation is at 9.4, and it's on natural mode, so it affects the lows and highs evenly. This is a really great plugin. I think it's free right now in their rack extension store, so make sure to pick it up as well. Okay, and then we have a equalizer. Again, just cutting out that kind of mid-frequency that I didn't want for the specific sound. The frequency is 600, the cut is at -13, and the Q is at 2.5. So without it would sound like this. So it really just cleans up the sound, especially when you start layering in lots of other sounds in a song. So the final part of this bass line is this sort of weird lead sound that sits on top that kind of provides the main melody, which sounds like this. So for the source material for this, I think it's actually the lead sound that I did in my tutorial, Simple Synths Are Better, or something like that. All it is a simple square waveform, which I just have this sort of long reverb note, which I bounced out, and then I just end up repitching it as the song progresses, and I like reverse it into sections. And as you can see, this transpose is changing as I kind of go through here. So that's how I created the melody, and then whenever it's layered on top of everything, it kind of gives it this very epic feel, which is kind of what I was going for. So if you want to look at the processing on that, it's quite simple. So first what's going on here is I'm cutting out all the bass and the kind of this low mid thing that was just building up in the sound, a little bit more of the saturation, and then I've got some compression, input gain at 5.6, thresholds down -25, about 3 decibel, 3 ratio, no attack because I just want this very like ambient wash sound rather than something that's actually punchy. And then I've got a nice delay. It's basically just the warm echo preset with the filter turned off just so we get all those high frequencies. And then I'm just running it into a large plate reverb that's got like a decay time of 95, so it's pretty long. And then I just cut out again the bass and that sort of mid frequency. So one thing that's also worth mentioning is the final processing that I did for this sound. I sent everything in the mixer out to this bus, and then I multi-band compressed everything. So what we can see here is I used 4 different bands of compression. I use a Softtube FET compressor. You can really use any compressor. What I started out with was this 4-band compression preset, which is under Reason Factory Soundbank, All Effects, Mastering, and that's just 4-band compressor. They've got all sorts of different ones in here that have preset splits. And then let's see, I just have about 8 decibels of compression on the bass, slow attack time, medium release, and then I just match the output gain. And then, let's see, it's basically the same settings all the way around, a little bit more 10:1 ratio, just medium attack, medium release. Yeah, basically the same thing, a little bit slower attack. As you can see with these sounds, as the bands get higher, this is the highest frequency band, so the real like light top end. I leave the attack slower and slower and slower as it progresses because I want that high frequencies to be super punchy. That's just kind of the sound I was going for. And then after that, everything's merged back into a splitter, and then that's sent to an EQ. And again, you can really use any equalizer you want. I just use the Softtube stuff because I just got it whenever I was working on this song. As you can tell, I really like these plugins. Okay, so let's see, high gain, it's cutting it at about 10,000 hertz, just cutting out about a decibel. At 3,000, it's a slight boost, just to add a little bit of crunch. And then we're cutting out, again, some of the mud at 250, and then cutting out some of the sub-frequencies with 1 decibel at 100. And I'm just saturating it with this output gain saturation knob right here. Okay, so that's the sound about sorted. There's a few last things that I did on each of the patches just to carve out some room for the sub. I cut out all the bass frequencies just to give the low end like some space to kind of operate and do its thing. You can see there's some light equalization here, but that's really more personal preference for the song, not as much sound design. And then I also did that on the reverse lead as well, because there's really no need to have bass down here, especially with like lead sounds. And the final thing that's going on here is you can see that automation that I talked about earlier with the sub oscillator. It's increasing, kind of modulating. And then I've also got a little bit of panning going on with the noise bass sound, which you can see right here. So on some of these hits, I have it kind of panned just to add a little bit of stereo interest. And that kind of makes the bass sound wider and also a little bit more interesting because this same note just keeps repeating. And you don't want to just have the same thing happening over and over. If you've got a modulation going on, it makes things a lot more interesting and fun to listen to as well. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. And also, if you want to keep up with the music side of things, make sure to also check out my other channel that I just made in the description below. And if you have any comments, don't hesitate to comment. I'll try to get to all those as soon as I can. And until next time, I will see you guys all later.